Good afternoon and welcome to our town hall during COVID-19 webinar. Thank you all for joining us, and please continue sharing your recommendations for programs at communications@architects.org. We'll share this contact information again at the end of the program. I'm Eric White, Executive Director of the BSA. We all know that we are entering a new world in response to this virus. The situation facing us seems ever-changing, and I want to share the ways in which we are trying to support you during this difficult time. We're going to spend a little time this afternoon sharing updates on our work and then also engage in a virtual conversation with you about how we can help and try to address some of your ideas and questions. And before I begin, I want to remind everyone of Governor Baker's announcement yesterday extending his emergency non-essential business closure order that went into effect today at noon, and which changes the language on allowed construction in his original order, and essentially limiting construction to emergency services, housing or mixed use with housing, and critical infrastructure. And it's essential to maintain safety and sanitation. If you aren't familiar with this yet, please visit our website, architects.org, for more details. Now, this webinar is part of an ongoing series, and our next webinar is Friday, April 3rd at 10 a.m. on HR and Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And the presenters include Michelle De Oliveira, Associate at Kenny and Sams, and Lindsay Burke, Director at Kenny and Sams. Now, while we continue to work on putting on this programming that is relevant to all of you, the local industry and the design community beyond Boston, I'd like to mention that this is an opportunity for sponsorship of such programs. They are responsive to our times, serve the greater good of the AEC industry, and reach hundreds in each session. Now, before we begin, just a few rules. Because we have a large number of participants, you are all on mute. For questions and answers, we thank you for all those questions you sent beforehand. However, due to the overwhelming response, we have selected a few key questions to answer during this time, and we'll keep using your questions for more BSA programs coming up. Feel free to use the chat option in the lower middle right side of the screen to interact with other participants, as well as the Q&A option to ask questions directly to the presenter if time permits. And as a reminder, this session will be recorded and posted on the COVID-19 resource page at architects.org. This session will be posted likely in the next day or two. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that because this pandemic is rapidly changing and it is a dynamic phenomenon that no one has experience with, we are all trying to figure this out together. Our conversation today is not intended to provide solutions or even definitive answers. There's no one size that fits all in this case. But it's intended to support the community with knowledge sharing so that we can all move forward together. Our goal today is to share updates on what the BSA community is working on. And I'm excited to introduce to you our panelists. First is Natasha Espada AIA, founder and principal of Studio ENÉE, and the 2020 president of the BSA AIA. Then Ted Touloukian AIA, president and founder of Touloukian Touloukian, and he's the chair of the BSA Foundation Board of Trustees. And third, we've invited 2018 BSA AIA president Jay Wickersham, FAIA, a partner at Noble Wickersham and Hart, Design and Construction and Environmental Law, who's going to be joining us to help discuss some of the legal questions that you shared with us. And then I'll give a little bit of an update on what's happening within the chapter. So to kick things off, let me turn it over to Natasha and get us started. Thanks, Natasha.
Thanks, Eric. So first of all, in this difficult time, thank you all for joining us. In this difficult time, I would be remiss not to mention two losses in the architectural community. Michael Sorkin and Michael McKinnell. We're really sorry and very sorry for their loss, and our thoughts are with their families and their colleagues. So to start, I'd like to talk about what we've done for the past 2 weeks. With the BSA, I've created 3 task forces, one to create guides for practice, one for policy, and advocacy, and one for the future of design and planning. So the first one is the guides for practice. I put together a task force to create one single resource of shared information for architects and architecture firms dealing with the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. These guides were completed last night, and I think, Eric, they are available to all on the BSA website at this point, and we will continue to update them as new information arises. So the topics that we put together for this were communication, office policies, work sharing, construction administration, travel, and financial support. One of the things that I would like to say is that we are creating a work sharing database, which is, I think, going to be live today to provide a community resource for firms to indicate if they need staff or if their projects are on hold and may be able to share staff so that we can discourage layoffs or furloughs. The layoffs in the last economic downturn caused many to leave the profession. This included many women and minorities, and we are determined to make sure that we can keep as many architects and designers employed as possible. The second one is the Policy and Advocacy Task Force. So we're working with AIA Massachusetts on city and state level policies regarding shutdowns, construction, the projects moving forward. All of this information is evolving and will continue to change. We're working with our partners in the industry. We have several meetings with our association and industry partners, such as AGC, ULI, NIOP, ASLA, and many others. And so with them, we're identifying opportunities for sharing information, and we're joining forces regarding state and city policy. Regarding the state, as Eric mentioned, the governor has issued an updated construction order, which takes effect at noon today, which prohibits all construction in the Commonwealth except construction essential to the following 3 items. One is maintaining the safety, sanitation, and essential operation of residences, businesses, and buildings such as hospitals, healthcare facilities, senior living facilities, and any temporary construction required to support COVID-19 response. The second one is housing, including mixed-use projects with housing, and the third one is critical infrastructure. DCAM is keeping, just as an update, DCAM is keeping essential state projects moving forward at this time. They're looking to provide guidance to both the design and the construction community. So far, this guidance has been more oriented towards the contractors and CMs. So we're really focusing on working to provide recommendations, questions, and concerns that they should be aware of to keep their critical projects moving for the design community and the design team members. For the city, the mayor has closed all construction sites, but PFD has some design projects moving forward, and all communication and meetings are virtual at this time. And regarding BPDA, I've gotten a lot of emails to know what the status is. We received some information this morning and I will read this. While public meetings are currently postponed until further notice, BPDA staff is working remotely, and internal review of projects and planning studies is continuing. Both internal staff meetings and external meetings are being held virtually when technology allows. Open comment periods are being extended until the public review process resumes. At this time, the BPDA board is planning to meet as scheduled on April 16th. Remote participation will be used to ensure the safety of the public, staff members, and BPDA board members and commissioners. At the board meeting, no Article 80 development projects items that require a public meeting or items that have not been previously completed. Their public process will be brought to the April board meeting for a vote. They will defer to public health guidance on the timeline for when both construction and public process will be brought to the April board meeting. For both construction and the public process can resume. BCDC, next week's BCDC meeting is being postponed. For design review, the BPDA is committed to keeping projects moving forward during this challenging time in a safe and effective manner. The BPDA continues to review projects electronically. Plans can be submitted via email. Hard copies cannot be accepted. During this time, the BPDA cannot issue design review approvals for plans, but as is possible, the BPDA Urban Design Department is queuing projects for design review approval for when the situation improves. And they appreciate our patience in all of this and will remain in contact as the situation develops. Regarding ISD, ZBA meetings have been canceled for the month of April. ISD has posted a helpful guide for other questions, which is under boston.gov, news, inspectional services, COVID-19 updates. And as the situation continues to evolve, please check bostonplans.org and boston.gov for updated guidance. So this is our advocacy and policy that has been going on in the past, well, recently and in the past 2 weeks. So the third task force that I've put together is one for future of design and planning. So as architects and designers, I believe that we can anticipate social and physical shifts coming out of this crisis. So when we were putting together the guidelines, we discussed having a piece on design and then decided to create a task force to really look into it. And get a lot of feedback on this. We're at a critical moment that will impact the way spaces, buildings, and cities will be designed and built going forward. So this is an area where we can show our relevance and provide creative, innovative design thinking and leadership for the future. So this is important to our profession, I believe, as I think it'll solidify the value of our profession. It will highlight our critical thinking and problem solving skills, and it'll make us leaders in our communities. So I'd like to pass this over to Ted now to talk about additional initiatives that are taking place and how you can help. But I wanted to mention that the BSA Make Tank Knowledge Community is working doing 3D printing of masks. And if you're interested, please reach out to them. You can go to our website, architects.org, and go into members and knowledge communities. Eric may have additional information, but I know Ted has additional information on other outreach programs.
Thank you, Natasha. I think Eric and Natasha has summed up this very well. This is, certainly a very extraordinary time, and the health crisis of COVID-19 that has been thrust upon us is forcing each of us to assess how we deal with the changes in our lives. And similarly for us at the BSA and the BSA Foundation, we are evaluating ways of how we can assist the needs of our community, specifically as it relates to the needs of families and neighborhood challenges. I'm going to touch on 3 of our strategic goal areas. The first being youth education and how we're adapting our programs. Many of you may have participated. For years we have provided design education to youth and families, serving over 4,000 kids in the last few years, particularly by providing access to design education in undersourced communities through our Kids Build program, which has really been a great success, to their families to engage in design and building projects with donated materials that have been provided by a great number of terrific people who have volunteered and donated things. We've done this either here at the BSA space, on the road, in areas like Dorchester's neighborhood of Lena Park, in partnership with Lena Park's CDC, or where we've been able to work with the Boston Public Schools with after-school programs in over 20 of the schools throughout the city. Certainly now, this type of interaction and in-person collaboration just cannot occur. The needs are still there. With the closing of schools and remote work environments for parents, we're hearing a lot of feedback from people saying that they're just getting taxed with too many worksheets for their kids, or too many Netflix videos, or just being in one room for too long. And I think all of us probably have a story that we can share along those lines. And I think I like to say the magic of Kids Build, that light bulb moment, the adrenaline of the creative problem solving, maybe is even more needed in remote environments. Previously, we worked hard to bring these programs directly to undersourced communities. Now we're evaluating ways to bring programs remotely, either through digital means, Zoom, videos. We're looking at ways we can use materials that are in homes, still with the goal to maintain a community of kids and families through the power of design and education. And as all of us are here today and we're able to ask questions, I think what we're seeking a lot of input would be how can we help families in this time and provide that alternative means of education that could just be a way to bring families together. Another area that we're looking at in our neighborhoods is community design and emergency preparedness, and this is certainly a pressing topic. More recently, our design resources have also expanded into the changing needs in these communities in an effort to prepare for increased COVID-19 demands on area hospitals. We have, the BSA has been soliciting nominations for buildings, facilities, or infrastructures that may be adapted to become alternative hospital sites. This is all been happening very quickly. Very recently, the BSA helped convene a number of architects working in the healthcare industry to brainstorm the types of resources needed for alternative sites by outlining rough guidelines, spatial requirements, technical considerations that may be needed to adapt existing buildings into these types of hospital sites. They include, power needs, electricity, HVAC, as well as accessibility baseline standards that can be applied to a number of potential sites. As you can imagine, not being able to work directly in the facilities has really brought a lot of the professionals and stakeholders together in a way of doing virtual reviews of spaces, or also working with software providers and even the management industry to help bring documents to us that we can do this evaluation. This has brought just together a robust network of stakeholders looking at this growing challenge, either through architects, the allied professionals, engineers and consultants, as well as the construction and the healthcare industry. This is all with the goal of really putting this into action and to assist with this healthcare pandemic. It's also widened our sort of understanding and the net of what's needed to not just with hospitals, but also as areas where we could potentially relocate patients with lower acuity needs into other temporary housing facilities. This has also brought other concepts, needs to the foreground about alternative emergency facilities for office space, staff, facilities for housing that may need to be sequestered in other safe environments. We're building a process, we're doing an assessment, and we're really reaching out to a large community to help identify these sites in a way that can help us identify places that could be put into action to really assist with this pandemic. We're certainly a vulnerable group of people here, and what I've learned through this process has been that the people working together are just stronger and smarter when we work together to solve this problem. And as we advance this out, not just the problems that we have today, our group is also begin to analyze how we can prepare for future problems that may be on the foreground, particularly around resiliency. Certainly we're addressing the needs of this pandemic and the healthcare crisis, but as we look out to the intermediate area, we want to similarly look at a process that can help us be more prepared for the carbon issues that surround our energy crisis, housing, as well as sea level rise and storm surge, and how we can be a great team of people that can be prepared, for future problems that may come before us. So look on the BSA website. If you are able to contribute and provide ideas and provide any assistance, we greatly appreciate it. This is certainly an extraordinary time, and again, the team is stronger together. Thank you.
Ted, thank you so much, and thank you, Natasha. And as I said in the beginning, we're really entering a new world that's challenging the architecture and building profession, and on a large scale, humankind. This is a terrible virus, and we're experiencing losses within our community. And every day we hear of someone in our circle seriously ill, or the passing of those that Natasha mentioned, Michael Sorkin and Michael McKinnell, FAIA, last week. And like all of you, we're trying to find our way through all of this and what we can do together to support the important work that you do. We've been hearing from many of you about the needs that you have, from navigating the new rules and operating systems for buildings, to business survival and financial advice, to new ways of working remotely, to how to assist the needs of our communities, and how to maintain connections with everyone within our community and circle, including the physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And the list keeps going on. But I have to say that what I'm really impressed with is you are the BSA, and you are the ones that are making this happen. As an example, Ted talked a little bit about the emergency preparedness work that's going on. That was a group that started with Mark Reed and a number of other architects coming together and identifying a challenge and putting their heads together to make this possible. And Natasha talked about the teams of architects pulling together the guidelines, which have just gone up on the website. You are the BSA, and we're trying to pull together the efforts to provide the resources and information and the ways to respond to these challenging times and highlight the work that you're doing. And you heard from Natasha and Ted on some of the things that we're doing now, and I just want to highlight a couple other things that are happening right now. These webinars are focused on the immediate needs for now, but we're going to start to transition to other subjects. For now, we're aiming at 2 a week, and we want to hear from you. What is it that you need to know? Next, we have upcoming sessions later this week on HR. We're planning sessions next week on financials and the CARES Act, and then also starting to look at how is the world of architecture changing as a result of this virus. And I'd also like to encourage everyone to look at the sessions that are being done now nationally through AIA.org. There's a wealth of information that's out there on the subjects you're looking for. Secondly, I want to point out that our knowledge communities are coming back, and I'm really excited about that. There are a number that are being scheduled, and they're all virtual. The first one, well, actually we had our first one last week, but we have one tomorrow night, April 2nd, Thursday at 5 p.m. And it's the EPNet community hosting a virtual happy hour. I really commend this group, and we're also trying to work on other social get-togethers. As I said in the beginning, the BSA is a community, it's all of you, and let's find ways to bring people together, even if we can't be closer than 6 feet apart. Third, there's resources at architects.org. We're collecting local and national resources to aim to help you and the industry directly. The guide that Natasha mentioned is posted there now. If you go to our website, scroll down and you'll find a wealth of information. And as with the webinars, I encourage you to visit AIA.org for another wealth of information that's out there. Now, some of you have been asking, how's the BSA organization doing? And like all of you, we're looking at how we change our operations to meet this new reality. As you know, our office is closed until further notice. Our staff communications have shifted. We're all using Microsoft Teams, which is incredibly helpful. Some of you who know me know that I worked in a history museum and that my technological abilities were lagging somewhere in the 19th century, but I've actually made the leap into the 21st century with these communication tools. And we're planning everything that we can do to shift as much of our programming as possible to electronic tools, while also at the same time looking for ways to be prepared that when this ends, that we'll have activities and events that you can come to that are safe and responsible in person. And like everyone, we're reforecasting our budget. We anticipate that this year will likely have a 20 to 25% shortfall. And unfortunately, organizations like the BSA do not qualify for the CARES Act. Associations don't qualify. But we have planned how to reduce expenses, and we're looking at stepping up our efforts in the philanthropic community. And to that note, I'd like to publicly recognize 2 donations we received in the last 2 weeks, each of $10,000. The first from Dynamic Air Corp, and the second from our board member and supporter, Greg Bielecki. We are incredibly grateful to all of our members and supporters, and this is what helps make all the work that's going on possible. So at this point, this is a good opportunity, I think, to move on to some of your questions, comments, and suggestions. We've tried to answer some of them in each of our presentations, but we know there's many others. We received a ton of questions, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. And we're also including a new element in our webinar, and you'll see this coming up very shortly. We have a few poll questions that will pop up on your screen. Please answer those questions. You'll have about 10 seconds to respond, and the results will show up on the screen shortly after that. So let's start with some questions, and actually I'd like to introduce Jay Wickersham, FAIA, and Jay, is there a question that jumped out at you that you'd like to take a shot at first?
Well, thank you very much, Eric. And yes, there were a number of questions that came in from architects asking in various ways, how can we best live up to our contract responsibilities with ongoing projects, particularly those that were under construction, given the current challenges? And so I'd like to sort of really hit on sort of three key points. The first point is use this opportunity to do what I know, in fact, all BSA members are doing already, and that is to keep your relationships with your clients strong. Keep letting them know that despite the challenges, despite working virtually, you are doing everything you can to keep their interests first, to move their projects forward and do whatever is needed in these challenging situations. So I think when it comes to contracts, the most important tool here is to keep that strong, well-forged relationship with your clients. And the second point I'd like to make is to where I think architects can be very helpful is to be clear. There's a lot of ambiguity right now. The governor just shut down most construction projects across the state. What does that mean? I think, so what we would recommend is to keep in touch, put it in writing with your client, with the contractor. The assumption would be that it is the owner. The owner runs the project. It's their project. They have now, on the direction of the governor, effectively had to suspend. So be clear that you are now treating this as a suspension of an ongoing construction project. But that doesn't mean that everything stops. There still are things to be done. There are still presumably shop drawings to review, RFIs to respond to, change orders to look at. So again, put it all in writing. Here is what we see as a roadmap going forward so that we can, in an orderly way, bring this project to a pause in a way that we will be able to then move ahead when the time comes to reopen. And maybe I'll turn it to Ted and Natasha if there's anything further you want to add from what you've heard from other BSA members about this process.
Natasha, just unmute, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think this goes to one of the questions that I was also interested in answering, which is how are firms addressing the safety of their employees in the field performing construction observations? And one of the things that we talked about when we were putting the guidelines, we give resources to the AIA website, and also to look at what the governor had put together as guidelines and procedures for construction sites. But also what we're finding, and what I've been hearing people talking about, is the fact that yes, you can review a lot of things on site, but when it comes to materials, reviewing construction sites, that is very difficult to do when you're not present. So basically, one of the things that we discussed was if you need to go to a site, maybe go after work hours, after 3:30, when maybe the project manager is there, but maybe the rest of the workers aren't there. Beyond, maybe have a checklist for your firm so that you avoid large groups, keep the distancing, no handshaking, wash your hands. But also there are videos. We can also do videos in some cases. And there's a Matterport is something that we were talking about. It's a platform that makes it easy to create a digital twin of any space. And so we're looking into that as well. So we're going to continue working on these guidelines to try to improve. But basically, I think it's based on the decisions that your firms make, but also kind of following the guidelines that have been set by the CDC.
You, you know, I want to add to your point, Natasha, and certainly Jay, around the ideas about construction. We are finding that the speed of jobs has been so intense that owners have looked to us to use this time as an opportunity to clarify RFIs, you know, work through submittals, and the owners that we have a few different jobs under construction really push the team idea more in order to be successful in this period. And it kind of goes to what Jay's, I think, two or three talking points were, which is keeping those relationships strong. You know, what I found recently is that the architect, owner, contractor, let's say three-legged chair, couldn't be more relevant in a time when we're in three different places. And it's this idea of checking in, being very clear about what you're working on, what people need assistance in, and being proactive as a group to talk about ways where we can streamline work so when work does begin again, it can happen in a way that's very organized as a team. And I found a lot of support through some of the owners that were working with us on this topic.
That's great. We just had a question come in, and I don't know if any of you would want to touch on this. I can add a little bit to it, but how do we get documents notarized, and do they need to be stamped with the embossed tip? And is anyone familiar with what the status of that is at this point?
This is Jay, Eric. I don't have an immediate answer to that, but I think it's a great question. And so we will look into that and get that information back to the BSA so that that can be something that's posted on the COVID-19 website, because I think there obviously will be a lot of questions about that.
And I can share a little bit on this, that we have, as Natasha said, we're part of a coalition of building industry associations. And one of the things that we talked about last night is that the governor is looking at being able to do e-notarizing. And this would be just during the period of the emergency. I'm not sure the status of that yet, but as soon as we have that information, we'll have that posted. Natasha, is there a question that was on your list that you'd like to take a look at?
The procurement of materials for construction in general was something that was asked a lot as well. And I thought that when we talked to the other industry associations, especially the construction related ones, they mentioned that there are delays on procurement of materials, but this is changing every day. If they're locally sourced materials, may be easier to find, but anything where you cross states or you have to travel to receive the materials, they're having some delays. So that is something to take into kind of to understand when you're revising construction schedules, or when you're thinking about when projects will be completed.
Ted or Jay, would you want to add anything to that?
Eric, I lost you in sound. I'm not sure if everyone else did.
Sorry. Ted or Jay, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Eric, this is Jay. No, nothing specific at this time. Again, it's all so fluid, but it's a great point for us all to keep in mind.
Ted, is there a question you wanted to touch base on?
You know, one that strikes me that I think we're all really confronted with, it says lots of projects are on hold. What can we do to move them forward, or I would say in general, you know, practice forward? I find that in small firms, which I have, is that we're constantly sort of working on projects, and then there are periods, of course, where there may be gaps. And I like to look at those as opportunities to add value for the firm. And if there's a lull, can firms look internally at ways that they can evaluate their graphics, evaluate the marketing, evaluate the way their narratives are working? There are a lot of RFPs that are surfacing out, and often RFPs ask really great questions of firms about how they define themselves. And I'd like to pose that as an opportunity for all firms to evaluate ways that they're marketing and branding themselves in periods when they don't have sufficient work with projects.
That's great, Ted. Natasha and Jay, anything you'd want to add to how we can keep work moving?
Well, I just want to answer, there are a couple of other questions that have just come up. And I don't mean to jump on something else, but one of the things about, just back to construction sites really quickly, Carol Wedge sent a chat saying that the healthcare providers are short of PPE supplies. We should be very careful not to take those precious resources away from them. And I just want to convey that it is true. It's really hard to get a hold of them, and it really should go to healthcare. So if you can minimize construction walkthroughs and use other tools, that is advisable. No, I think the biggest thing is keeping communication open. And I do want to say again about the work share, regarding what Ted was saying, that if there are projects that are on hold temporarily and we could share resources, that gives another option for when you're thinking about your staff and capacity and projects coming on board.
Jay, another question that came in that I think people are wondering about is, can you require a client to complete a health questionnaire? Are there any legality issues around this?
And I'm sorry, Eric, you're asking to be a little more precise here. So this is an architect asking an owner about their own operations. Is that right?
That's how I would interpret this.
Yeah, I think that's, again, we're all kind of learning about new areas of law and regulation that we've never dealt with before. I think that's another great question, and another one that I think we're going to need to talk to one of the experts on that. I think that's really going to go more towards issues of employment law. And so let's put that also on our list. I do think that, going back to an earlier point, if we're talking about the on-site job site issues, that is an area where, of course, the contractor is the one who is responsible for job site safety measures. But as architects, we need to keep abreast of what is being done and the evolving rules in that area. There was mentioned already that one of the governor's letter last week on construction had some baseline job site safety precautions. I've seen some more expansive protocols that national construction groups are developing, and I think we will start to see that. So again, it's not the architect's job to develop them or to enforce them, but we certainly should continue to be aware of job site safety rules, because that's going to be very fast evolving as well.
I agree with that. And also, yes, the guidelines that the governor put out requires each employee to self-certify that they have no signs of illness or have not been in close contact with anyone. So that one is a written policy, but I don't know of any client policies.
Jay, is there another question on your list that you'd like to take a look at?
Well, sure, Eric. I think, getting a little more into the nitty-gritty of contracts, there have been a lot of questions that we've been fielding that came in both for this event and also from our clients, specifically about contract delays and how architects should address those. And there's a lot of discussion about so-called force majeure clauses. So just a couple things to say. There is not a force majeure clause. That is a clause that would address these kinds of catastrophic events, typically found in architectural contracts. And that's not a problem because there are several other clauses in all standard architect contracts that address the delay issues that we are seeing. If the owner shuts down a job, that is a suspension by the owner, and the AIA contracts and all other standard contracts have a set of clauses that address owner suspensions, including, and it's worth looking at this, the possibility that if you have a good-sized team that you have to wind down, you may be entitled to demobilization costs. So those kinds of issues are addressed in standard contracts. Similarly, if a job is continuing, not here in Massachusetts for the most part, but maybe in other states, and the contractor is unable to perform for the kinds of reasons that Natasha mentioned, there are clauses in all standard design contracts that would address these delays that are due to causes outside of the architect's control. So again, architects are protected if it is contractor delays that are affecting them. And third, if the architect themselves are having trouble because there may be some inefficiencies in working remotely, in coordinating with your consultants. Again, there are clauses in all standard contracts that for reasonable cause, and believe me, a government-ordered health emergency ought to qualify as reasonable cause. If there is reasonable cause or cause outside of the architect's control, those will excuse delays. So again, I don't think people should be concerned because nothing in your contract refers to a pandemic. There are broad standard provisions in design contracts that anticipate these kinds of issues. So be familiar with your contract. And if in fact the job shuts down entirely, you may be able to recoup some of these additional costs in that final invoice at this point. So that's just a quick addressing of that issue, Eric.
Thank you, Jay. Here's a slightly different angle on some of the questions that we've been looking at, and that is, what should really the BSA be doing, and what should architects be doing in response to the environmental regulations that are being loosened at the federal level that will have an impact on climate beyond this health crisis? And I don't know if any of you have thought about some of those issues.
I think one of the things when we talked to in general, when we were talking to the other associate organizations, it was discussing how when regarding policy in general, we need to just kind of focus on this right now, but we should be looking ahead as well for opportunities to make sure that there are things that don't fall through the cracks. But in general, I think what we determined was that we really need to put our efforts into this because of the uncertainty of it, keeping in mind in the back burner, and maybe this is what the task force on design and the future and moving forward and advocacy can really focus on, is making sure that we continue moving forward in all of those fronts. But for now, I think we've just been focusing on making sure that the firms have the resources that they need.
And I can add just a little bit, but and I don't know if Jay or Ted, you'd want to add anything to that. I do know that National is working on opposing those basically the loosenings of the climate environmental regulations, and I think there's advocacy work that's being done there at the national level. And you know, as far as I'm aware of, there's nothing that is changing on the environmental regulations at the state level at this point. And I don't know, Jay or Ted or Natasha, have you heard anything in those regards?
Eric, this is Jay. Yeah, I have certainly. There has not been the kind of rollback of environmental regulations in Massachusetts that we've seen at the federal level over the past 4 years. Exactly the opposite. And so, in fact, you know, one of the things that we may see coming out of this will be, as there was after the 2008 recession, a major funding for public works. And one of the things that I think we've really learned here in Massachusetts is we can rebuild public works to address the issues of climate, rebuilding parks and roads to address sea level rise and resiliency, putting money into public buildings to make them as energy efficient as possible. It's not going to cost more, and it's going to recoup enormous long-term savings. So I think there would be a great opportunity, at least here within the state, to see this next round as an opportunity to keep building on everything we have learned in the last few years.
And go ahead, Natasha.
I just wanted to add something else. At our board retreat this year, we had a joint board retreat, and we discussed opportunities for environmental and resiliency opportunities to come together with the Green Ribbon Commission in the city. So there are a lot of initiatives that are happening right now. We don't want them to stop, but again, I think we've just taken a quick pause. But I think the goal is not to let any of that fall apart or making sure that we continue to do all of that work.
And actually, you just hit on what I was going to say, is that our work with the Green Ribbon Commission is continuing on, and we're still working on programs, and in particular looking at working with the city on achieving their 2050 goals for net zero. And there's some programs and projects that we've been in conversation with Green Ribbon on to advance those, and there'll be more coming out on that very soon. So we're continuing to move forward, and I know that the Green Ribbon Commission and the city is also doing that, and the state is also doing that. I think the big question obviously is at the federal level, and I can say that AIA National is definitely on top of this and trying to push, but there's certainly pushback on that from the federal level.
And in addition to that, Eric, I just want to say, in addition to looking at all of these opportunities for environmental opportunities with the city and in general, we're also looking at affordable housing. Issues with affordable housing has also been something that we don't want to let fall through the cracks.
We've been talking a lot about emergency preparedness and building a process that's going to help meet the immediate needs. It is leaning towards future potential challenges that we may have, that we have been discussing, as we all have been bringing up: carbon, our housing crunch, storm surge, sea level rise. I think questions are going to come up, and certainly funding will as well, as how can we be more proactive versus reactive in our time to address our environmental challenges that are posed in front of us. I think this is going to be an interesting business proposition for the design professionals in the coming period.
I just want to jump back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, and Janelle had raised this, that she had heard from folks in China that they're back in full mass production of all types, and they're receiving personal use of masks. But it's important to buy these from legitimate websites, and as Carol had mentioned earlier, not taking these away from the healthcare industry or healthcare professionals that need them right now. So I think being cautious is really important on masks, and making sure that you're getting what you're looking for. And that also goes to the 3D printing. We had initially started doing some work on 3D printing of masks with the Make Tank knowledge community. As they were looking at that, they discovered that they actually do not meet the regulations for health in this particular situation, and so they are working on other PPE requirements or materials and tools, but just being cautious about that. We've got time maybe for one or two more questions, and this is one that came in online. If a firm employee has COVID-19 symptoms or is tested positive, what responsibility does the firm have to notify other employees? Jay, is that something you're familiar with?
No, again, I think what we'll need to do, and I think it's a great question, and I saw there were other questions related to that, is I know that we've got HR lawyers who are going to be doing a webinar on Friday.
Yes.
And I don't know whether these are topics are on their agenda yet, but I think these would be some excellent ones. Because there's a whole body of employment law that firms will need, which is in itself is undoubtedly going to be fast evolving, like the law of construction. And we're all going to need to learn about that.
That's great. And actually, I'll say the same thing on one other question that's come in, which is as a small business owner, my concerns are financial. How can I float the business when most work has come to a halt? And I really want to encourage folks to join our session next week that I believe it may be getting moved up to Monday, but I'll have more information on that soon, that is going to be looking at the CARES Act and other financial resources that are available for firms during this period. So, Natasha and Ted, are there other questions that you saw on the list that you want to make sure that we respond to?
Yeah, I think there was one that is sort of maybe a white elephant for a lot of employees, which is, how do we address employees' concerns? There were questions surrounding, how do we understand them? And I think this couldn't be more important as a business owner. Kind of goes back to the earlier points that were made about, what Jay said about keeping relationships strong and being very clear. Things are changing day to day. We see patterns where jobs are going on hold. We hear patterns of new jobs being awarded, and the future is definitely not clear. I think the best thing that we can do for each other is just letting people be aware of the climate that we have, letting people be aware of what work is in the pipeline. And what I found is that employees in general are really, really positive about being proactive and being nimble and doing what they can to help the business, move through this trying period. So I think obviously employees' concerns are different for each individual, but making sure that all of us are putting time aside to speak with each other honestly about, what the conditions are currently and what the conditions are ahead, so that we're being respectful to all people during this very difficult period.
Can I add to what Ted just said? Is the two places where we've been hearing that there are concerns are people that are working, that live alone, that feel very isolated, and the other ones are people that are caretakers to others, such as children, young children, or the elderly. And in general, I feel like we need to find support groups for those two, specifically for those two groups. Office culture, there was a poll that said that office culture was one of the biggest concerns for firm owners, to make sure that the culture of the firm remained and for people in the firms. And so finding opportunities to create communities for people that are virtually, even if we make, and we're going to try to do this through the BSA, is to try to make smaller groups where you can have social interactions with people, not just work interactions, but also trying to figure out a way of engaging young children if both parents are working, or giving support to people who are caretakers of the elderly is, I think, really important. I don't know, Eric, if you have heard of anything else.
I think those are incredibly important. And as you said, Natasha, one of the things that we are looking at, and if there's people out there that might be interested in helping pull this together, is putting together some online knowledge community support groups for those folks that are trying to do some of those things. So working at home with children or adults, parents. What happens when you're working alone and just not having the opportunity to socialize. And along those lines, we're also looking at what are some opportunities that we can use for socializing in addition to information on webinars. A few people have mentioned ideas like the dine-arounds, like e-dine-arounds, or showing a movie and having people be able to have comments, or just even the bar sessions, the remote bar sessions and such. So I think we are working on trying to pull some of those together. But if there are those of you that are interested in helping us, please reach out and let us know, as we would love that assistance and help. Is there any last things that either Natasha, Ted, or Jay that you'd like to offer to folks?
Well, this is Jay. I mean, I would just say, and this is repeating what all of the panelists have been saying, build on our strengths. I mean, architects are great at working together in teams, both within the firms and within these larger project teams, and in kind of being creative problem solvers. And, boy, do we need creative problem solving in every aspect of our lives right now. So just, if we all try to, to sort of breathe deep and kind of keep working together, I think we can all sort of make great contributions here.
I agree with Jay, and I also think that there are so many opportunities for us to be leaders in our communities right now, and so we're putting together opportunities for those situations. One thing that I meant to say is that someone suggested to me, which I think is a great idea, is if they may have projects on hold, but they want to keep their staff busy, that maybe at the BSA we come up with some ideas for charrettes or things that can really kind of put them in the pipeline for things that are happening in the city, so that we can have people collaborate on these things and kind of find solutions for when we are out of this, hopefully. And that we can move forward with really important projects throughout the city.
And I think in the spirit of, collaboration and teamwork and really unity, there's a piece of this which touches on a lot of humanity of this problem for me, and I think a lot of us, we talk about this, is just graciousness. And graciousness, in the way that means with, not only our time that we give to others, the words that we share with others, our resources. All of us have something to give, and it's important in this time to, be gracious and to be kind, and to really remind ourselves that our unity is going to help us come out of this on top.
And I think that's a great place for us to bring this to a close, and just to say, as in a sense we've been saying throughout this, you are the organization, you are the BSA, you're what makes it happen and makes everything work. And so please keep sharing your ideas. Thank you all for joining us. You can share your feedback at communications@architects.org. And you can stay up to date on what's happening through the website, through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course, signing up for our e-newsletter, Currents, which, because there's so much news that's happening, we're going to be sending that out twice a week for the immediate future, and likely starting that next week. We hope that you'll be able to join us on Friday at 10 a.m. for our next webinar, HR and Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And before I go, I want to thank all my colleagues on staff. Like you, we are in a new world, and we're working to build this new system and simultaneously provide these resources and delivery methods for all of you. And as part of that, as I mentioned earlier, the knowledge communities are coming back. We're bringing these things online for all of you. And tomorrow, in addition to the EPNet group tomorrow evening, there's a small practices virtual meeting tomorrow at noon that we hope you'll be able to join if you're in a small firm. And finally, please join me in thanking Natasha Espada AIA, Ted Touloukian AIA, and Jay Wickersham FAIA for joining us today. We know that you've also had your lives turned upside down, and we truly appreciate your willingness to take this time and share your knowledge. Thank you for all that you guys are doing. And I have to say that having these folks have heard from me a lot over the last couple of weeks, and I really have to personally thank you for all that you've been doing. And as a reminder to all of you, be safe, be healthy, and be kind. And thank you all, and we hope to see you Friday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric, and bravo to you as well.
Yes, agreed.
Yes. Thank you.